You probably heard about the 36 questions that need to be asked to fall in love with anybody. These questions became quite famous after a 2015 New York Times article in which the female journalist had tested these questions that she had received by a quite famous psychologist with her, at that time, friend but not boyfriend. And after they had asked each other these questions, they indeed fell in love. And the media echo was gigantic. In many TV series, like for example Big Bang Theory, the questions were discussed and promoted. And the big question was, is it really that easy to fall in love with anybody just by asking 36 questions? And the quick answer is, of course not. Of course not. You cannot fall in love with anybody by doing this. But chances are that the probability that you fall in love with somebody you knew quite well to this point, but you were not completely in love with the other person, chances are that you might fall in love with her. And the big question is why? Why are these questions so effective or different from other questions? And therefore, we have to take a look at the questions and take a look at some studies that might explain why these questions are that effective. Well, the questions begin quite harmless. They begin by asking quite funny things like, for example, given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? Second question, would you like to be famous? In what way? Question number 4. What would constitute a perfect day for you? And even though these questions might sound funny and quite trivial, they probably promote that you find some similarities. Like for example, if the other person says, well, the perfect day, I would be lying at the beach and drink pina colada the whole day. And maybe you see yourself in doing that as well. Well, you would say, well, of course, this sounds really great. And finding similarities is something we have learned in many episodes now. So for example, in studies could be shown that if somebody has the same birthday, if somebody has the same name, especially if it's a quite uncommon name, we tend to like this person more. And even if somebody imitates our body language, we on a subconscious level get the impression, well, the other person seemed to be similar to us. And really, many studies could show similarity promote sympathy. But let's move on. The questions become more and more emotional. So for example, question number 15 is, what is the greatest accomplishment of your life? Number 17 is, what is your most treasured memory? And the moment you tell all the greatest memories of your life to another person, you also experience them again. And therefore you feel all these positive or sometimes negative emotions. And this is something we have seen from the suspension bridge study, in which an attractive female experimenter went out to a suspension bridge and asked people who were walking on this bridge some random questions. But later on it could be shown that those who were asked on this suspension bridge and not in a control place actually more often asked for the phone number of the good-looking, attractive experimenter. And these results are explained with an misattribution of emotions. So you are walking on the suspension bridge and you are very excited, and then you meet a good-looking woman. And it seems that later on people think, well, I was very excited. It was maybe it's because I was in love with this person. Maybe she was the one. And exactly the same might be happening with the very emotional questions of the 36 questions to fall in love with anybody. The moment you discuss these emotional things, maybe you feel some butterflies in your stomach and you misattribute those positive feelings with, oh, I'm falling in love. But the questions do not only become more emotional, they also become more intimacy promoting, which means take a look, for example, at question number 35. Of all the people in your family, whose death would you find most disturbing and why? So this is a really tough question, and if you answer this question, you really give an insight to your soul. And it's the same bonding that happens if you have a very crazy secret with another person, and this really leads to sympathy. Take a look, for example, at the study by Huang and colleagues published in 2017, in which they asked participants to talk to each other for some minutes, but some participants were told to ask the other person 4 questions, whereas other participants were told to ask at least 9 questions. And it turned out if you ask more questions, especially if you ask more follow-up questions. So for example, the other person tells you, well, I dropped out of school when I was 15. And then you ask more and more questions about this topic. Like, for example, okay, why, what happened? How did your parents react? And if you ask a lot of these questions, of course, you get more, you could say, secrets, more intimacy from the other person. And this later on, if you have this exchange, this reciprocity of intimacy, this later on leads to sympathy. It's like having a secret together. Very interesting is also the very last question, question number 36. Share a personal problem and ask your partner's advice on how he or she might handle it. Also ask your partner to reflect back to you how you seem to be feeling about the problem you have chosen. Asking other people for advice actually increases the sympathy the other person has for you. This could be shown in several studies. For example, in a study in which participants were introduced to a helping organization called Building Hope, and they were asked, well, do you have any advice for this organization? What could they improve? How could they reach more people? And later on, the same people were asked, well, we are also collecting money for this organization. Would you be willing to give money to this organization? And it turned out that those who had given advice actually spent 46% more money for this organization. They were more willing to help than those who had not given the advice. So asking for advice actually is quite good advice. So to sum this up, of course, the title of the New York Times article was quite clickbait because you don't fall in love with anybody, but there are some psychological mechanisms at work here that might actually help to fall in love with somebody. So if you want to try it with somebody, do it and let me know what happens. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you want, we will see you next time.